Okay, I think I'm 1 minute past, so I can start something at least. So good afternoon, and I believe you guys are having a wonderful, wonderful conference so far. And I'm sure you were waiting for this last one, and should be the best one, right? And that's why I have very few people here, because this is for the best. Anyways, the bar has been set so high, so I don't know how much I'll be able to satisfy you guys, but let's see, okay? First and foremost, my name is Subrata Majumder, and I am somewhat new to Ping, officially not, if you look at the HR, but otherwise I am. As you guys know, that Ping had recently, about a year, but acquired Unbound ID, and I was part of Unbound ID, and that's how I became part of Ping. So what we are going to talk today is more kind of touching those products which came over to Ping from Unbound ID, the type of problems you face, and how do you solve those problems. Definitely 50-55 minutes is not enough to talk about all the products and the features of it, so I'm not going there at all. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take a use case, and which we find very often in most of the engagements that we get into, where that legacy Unbound ID product set had been used. And I'm sure you guys will also find that use case if you have not already. So that's more around marketing consents, consents in general, but I'm kind of going a little bit further down into the marketing consents and the marketability. So as you know, that different laws are around there, who you can market to, who you can send communications to, any electronic communication stuff. And different countries of the world have got different rules and stuff like that. So this is kind of becoming almost in every engagement we go into, we see this as a requirement that how do I manage this problem? How do I solve this problem that I have huge number of identities, I have huge number of email addresses to my business, and once again, we are going into not in the enterprise space, we are going more in the consumer space, okay? So how do I make best use of those email addresses or contacts that I have, be able to market to those, get the business out of those, but at the same time comply with all the regulations. And the bigger the organization, the global the organization, the bigger the problem, okay? So that's the use case I'll go into, but I may just walk through a little bit of kind of the history or the geography of it before I get into that. And this is the problem I'll take, that there's a company, it's a US-based company, but it's a global business. So they have their country and region-specific compliance that they need to make, because different countries have got different market regulations. And they want their customer email marketing opt-in and opt-out, the users they do. Even though in some cases it is allowed that you can delay for some time before you need to actually have to comply to the opt-in, especially the opt-out part of it. But they would, most of the businesses as we worked on, they would not. Opt-out, they may want to wait because say, okay, say US gives you 10 days before you have to honor it, okay? Canada tells you, no, you have to do it immediately. Okay? So if I say that, okay, I'm a business, I can, if you opted out today, I can wait for 10 days, I can still send you all those emails on coupons for the 10 days before I have to comply, I'm fine, I'm happy with that. But the other case, the opt-in, that's where businesses, the marketing and coming in and saying that, what about opt-ins? A guy opts in today, and if I have to wait for 10 days before I see that, that's my lost revenue, okay? So how do I take care of that? At the same time, if I can take care of that opt-out immediately as well, that might go a long way for the relationships that I have with my customers. Okay. At the same time, if I say, okay, yeah, I can write programs for that, I can do it, all those things I know today, I put those in, all the logics, fine, go with. Come tomorrow, the rules might change. Another country might come up with another rule, okay? I might go into a different country where I didn't do business previously. So do I have to kind of bring my developers once again, look into everything and write the code? That's not going to fly with the people who are holding the purse string, right? So we have to find some kind of an innovative solution, or a solution that, yes, I can give you a solution where you still be able to achieve all those things to the top, but still, as the regulations come in, or existing regulations change, or I expand my business, still be able to, the same rules or same stuff, be able to use that same program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a little bit of the consents and stuff to start with, and the marketing consents. Talk about a little bit of the electronic address, what you mean by that, and the CEM, which is the commercial electronic messaging. Now, these are terminologies, but most of you may be already hearing those, or will be hearing those as you go into those kind of engagements. And finally, quickly, the Ping data platform that will go where I touch the things and then go the actual problem and solve that, implement that over here, okay? Now, the consent, obviously, there are dictionary definitions of it, but at the end of the day, somebody is allowing you or permitting you to do something. Now, it could mean different things depending upon which business you are in. I just took one example where, yeah, I am consenting my retailer to send me coupons or send me newsletters or something like that. That's one type of consent that mostly falls under marketing consent, that who I can or a business can market to. But there are other types of consents as well, that I may be consenting that my caregiver can view my profile data, some or all, right? That's another type of consent. I may be giving my spouse consent to look at my medical records, okay? So depending upon which space domain you are in, what type of problem you are trying to solve, you will see the consent is going to play a big role, once again, in that consumer identity space. Okay, as long as we are in the enterprise space, it doesn't matter much. Those use cases do not come that much, okay? A little bit here and there, but not that much. So that's why the consents and sometimes if they call permissions, so all consents are permissions, all permissions are not consents, okay? So we're looking at the consents, and today we are looking into more into the marketing consents, where I'm allowing the retailer or my insurance provider to send me newsletters or coupons or whatever they want to. Now, electronic address is, once again, the definition varies a little bit from here and there, but most of the cases it falls under your email address, your telephone number where you can send an SMS to, your instant messaging address, and some other collaboration accounts. It could be your Skype account, it could be your Slack account, and different things, okay? Now, go from country to country, what they actually identify by an electronic address may change, but most of the cases you will find this. The commercial electronic message, once again, the definition varies here and there in the wordings if you read, but at the end of the day, it is nothing but a message that is sent with the ultimate purpose of encouraging you to participate in a business with me, okay? So that's the kind of messaging we're talking about. If you look at how does it actually, means why do I care? I'm an identity access management person. Why do I care about those things? So if you look at those, that the electronic profile data, or the email address or phone number, all those things we talk about, ultimately those are part of my profile. So it's my profile management. It becomes my part of how do I create the account, what do I gather, how do I manage those things. All those become part of my profile management. Businesses then try to use those data, so they need to have some way of accessing the data. But that doesn't mean that each and every application in my organization, or each and every person in my organization, gets access to all pieces of data. That doesn't make sense. That may be easy, but that doesn't make sense. So you have to have some kind of access control, which will depend on who you are, which application you are using, in which context you are coming in, may even be which day of the week you are coming in. Okay, so all those things become the access control problem at the end of the day of that profile data. Now, at the same time, I may be sending an email at the end of the day, but I may have to access other profile information before I can, or I as a marketing person can decide that what I should send and when I can send those and who I can send those to. So I may be having a promotion, and if I send it to all, you know those target use cases, right? So it goes into that you send up stuff what you really didn't want to send. So you need to know about that profile more before you actually perform that operation. So that's why it kind of starts coming into the IAM world that, yes, you as an IAM person also should be worried about those things, even though, oh, it should be marketing's problem. So the battle is mainly between the business and consumer. Businesses obviously would like to use all your data. They want to have access to each and everything you have, and they would like to send you marketing communications in each and every way possible. At the same time, as if you put yourself in the consumer's shoes, you will see that, no, I want to control my own data. Okay, and I want to tell you that what you can do and what messages you can send to me, or which email address of my profile you can use to send me an email if you want to, or text messages if you want to. So at the end of the day, so that means a business has to think about how do I keep a balance between those two, keep my consumers happy, but at the same time make most out of the profile information that I have with me. I touched kind of this thing a little bit before, but kind of if you look into how these different regulations from different countries. So as you know, the Castle thing, the Canada's Anti-Spam Law, it took effect, or is going to actually full and final taking effect from July 1st of this year. It started 3 years back. They gave you 3 years to comply, all the businesses, but after July 1st, each and every organization sending an email without permission is going to be fined, okay? And that fine is very, very high, and it could even might go into some kind of criminal punishment. So in this case, it's applicable for the Canada law. It's applicable to all the emails, text messages, all the IMs, and they say all others similar. Now, if you just read the law, okay, I don't know what all others similar mean, but any kind of messaging they mean. Canada needs that a user, a consumer, has to explicitly opt in, explicitly give you permission before you can send any kind of email communication or any kind of message marketing communication to that person. It's not only applicable to anybody in Canada, it's a Canadian business. If it sends to anybody else in the world, it's applicable to that. Okay, if you have an office in Canada, it's applicable to you. Okay, it doesn't matter who the person, who owns that email address. That doesn't matter. Okay, so it's very, very strict. Come to U.S., it's kind of very lax, expected. Okay, but still there are laws around it. So it will tell you that there's no explicit consent required. So you don't have to give me permission before I can send you communications. But if I opt out, then from that point onwards, you have 10 days to comply. But after that, if you still send me communications, then yes, that's once again, those hefty fines there, but it can even go into, because CAN spam is more around pornographic messaging and stuff like that. That's where it came from. So, so it has got very, very criminal, means the actual penalties are more around criminal offense and that kind of stuff, but still. Okay. EU is kind of confusing. So EU started with that EU e-privacy directive, but that's a directive, that's not a regulation. So every country in the EU had their own interpretation of it. They wanted to do it that way. But now all of you guys know that GDPR is coming in. Okay, and GDPR is going to take effect. It's going to be effective once again in May 2018, and that is kind of drop dead. Now, all the companies in Europe is waking up. Oh, we have to be GDPR compliant, right? So once again, the same thing. You need to have explicit consent before you can send in emails to that. And fines are once again there. The good thing about that, both the AntiSpam and GDPR is it's only about emails. It's not like Canada's abroad about any electronic messaging, okay? So these two are only about emails. So we'll stick to emails for today. Okay, now a little bit different, but just move to a different direction. So as you know that most of the people who are familiar with Ping, obviously you know this product. You know the Ping Federate, the oldest one, and the Ping Access and the Ping ID. That's the Ping world, okay? And now, as I said, that about a year back, the Unbound ID acquisition made that product offering much broader, and now we have a more complete solution possible with the Ping offerings. And so we got the main three products from there. Obviously, at the center of it, the Ping data directory. So the directory, the LDAP directory that we have is at the center of the data platform. But the two other things, one below it and one above it, you can see it that way. The one with the data sync is mainly used for ETL purposes, you can say, very simply putting. So you get data from, if you have other repositories, one or multiple, you want to consolidate data, or you want to keep multiple repositories in sync, that doesn't have to be Ping directory. Okay, you can use sync even if you don't have Ping directory. But it was created in kind of keeping in mind that, oh, we have other repositories, you have to bring data into Ping directory. So it started from there, but where it is now is it doesn't really need Ping directory at any end of it. Yes, yeah. It can send a flat file to another flat file if you want. So obviously you have to write some extensions for that, but there are plugin points there you write, and there are SDK there you have to write for it. It will not just do it by like that. So we provide an SDK with which you write the extensions to our plugin points. But it's possible. Now, the other thing is the Ping data governance, and which one we are going to kind of concentrate more on today. The governance tool, and once again, depending upon when you started learning about Unbound ID or how long you know Unbound ID for, you might have heard a different name. It used to be called broker, okay? So data broker is now called data governance, and that's the name going forward. And that's the main tool that we're going to talk about today. And that is, at the core of it is a policy engine. So you have your data access, but if you front it with data governance, you get data access control. And that data access control is fine-grained access control. It's an attribute-based access control model, ABAC model, okay? So you can control that, and when I say attribute, that's not only the attribute of the user or the profile of the user, it can be the attribute of the environment that you are going in, the attribute of the context that you are coming in. Okay, there are other attributes you can bring in. It doesn't have to be just the attributes of the user or the data that you are accessing. So at the end of the day, it's an access control policy model, and it uses XAML to write the policies, and the data access is scheme-based. So it's all standard-based over there. There's nothing proprietary. But at the end of the day, you get a standard-based access to the data and a standard way of writing policies. And each and every request goes through the policy evaluation. Okay, how am I doing on time? Good. Okay, so kind of already talked about that, but just another recap, a little bit different. So as the last one, as I was saying, it's all standard-based. It also had the current version, the previous version had the support for YDC and OAuth. But the main things are the scheme as well as XAML. Okay, so let's get down to work. I started doing a little bit more than what I thought I would be able to do within the time, but as I kind of started doing it, I thought, no, it is going to be too much. So initially, I thought that we'll go over a sync process as well to bring the data and maybe consolidating data from multiple repositories and then going into that way. So that's why you might see in this description a little bit more than what we may be covering today. But that's just for the sake of time. So the ultimate solution, that's what I was originally planning to go to. So you have your existing repository, and the plan is there was multiple repositories you have where you are collecting the profile data, and then you are collecting also the consents of the user, the consents for marketing, okay? You can bring those data, consolidate those records in the Ping directory, the new Ping directory that you are kind of putting in your environment. The data will be synchronized. You can put it to one-way or bidirectional sync. So it doesn't have to be that you have to retire your existing repositories. You may want to continue because there are applications which may all be depending on that repository. You may not have the time or budget to immediately have those applications modified to come to the new repository. So we have to have that support. So you can have the bidirectional things going on. But at the same time, anything new coming in, you want the users to be managing their profiles in the new repository, and definitely the rightmost one is the key going into that. That there is a marketing application, it's coming in, it wants to, at any point in time, it needs to find out, can I market to this particular email address? Or what is my universe of email addresses at this very point in time, okay, complying with all the regulations, and so the set of email addresses that I can send this marketing message to, okay? Okay, so I'll now switch over to the actual implementation and configuration. What I did is I had already set up a directory just to avoid delay over there. So I set up the directory, which one is that, yeah. And I set up some users over there. The sample users that I created to show different use cases. So this is the main attribute that I'm keeping over there in the user's profile, that what consent you have given. So as we talked about, there are two different types of consent. One is an implicit consent, another is explicit consent, right? So in the US, as we said, that if you don't opt out, a business can assume that you have implicitly opted in. Okay, but that's an implicit grant, kind of not implicit grant in what world, but it's implicitly granting to send me email messages. So depending upon which country I am in, I may need to have that capture, that is this an implicit grant or implicit consent, or is an explicit consent. And when it is explicit consent, then I need to capture, yeah, it's explicitly opted in or opted out. So what I did over here, I modeled it around that. I just had 3 different values over there, allowed the -1, 0, and 1 to represent that. Once again, to make it very simple. So the -1 will be the implicit consent, whereas the 0 and 1 will be explicit opt-out and explicit opt-in. You have, I created the email addresses over there, the 2 different types. You will find that some with .com and some with .ca, because we'll go into a use case where we'll see that, yeah, if it is an implicit grant, in that case, if it is a Canadian email address, then we should not be even able to do that, even if I say an implicit grant. But if it is a US address, now there are different ways in your business or in integration that you are going into, it might be other things. But in this case, I'm just looking into the email address and the last part of it and kind of making an assumption that you are Canadian or US person, okay? It may not always be true because a Canadian can have a .com email address, but then you may want to see the country or other attributes. But that's not going to, just the logic of the policy will change, nothing else. So that's why I'm not going into the directory installation over here. Going back to my presentation over here, quickly touch base on how data sync works. Once again, we are not going to configure those yet, but the data sync, as I said, that at the data sync, you can have a unidirectional or a bidirectional setup. So you can have data coming in only one direction, or you can say, no, it's always both will be, has to be in sync. So you can set it up in either way. The thing is, every direction is called a pipe. Okay, it's called a sync pipe. So you configure a sync pipe for each direction that you want to send the data to. So in a bidirectional, you're basically setting up two different pipes. Each pipe has got a source and a destination. It can have only one source and one destination for the configuration, but every source can be multiple actual physical repositories. So when you configure a source, you can specify that it's actually a combination of this repositories. So that way, a sync pipe can go to multiple sources, combine data from there, and bring that in. Same about the destination. You can do it for the destination as well. So on the other side, when you configure, you can, if it is not a kind of one-to-one mapping, you have to do a couple of things, like you may have to do a DN map if the DN of the source and the destination is different, or if the source is not even a LDAP directory, it's a different kind of source, there's not a concept of DN. So there are things like that you may have to configure depending upon what your exact source and destination is. So you may have to do some DN mapping, you may have to do some attribute mapping. So even if it's a similar kind of schema, you may have different attribute names. You may be going to one from the other, and so you may be creating some attribute maps over there. The reason we say 0 to n over there because those are optional depending upon the configuration, but more often than not, you need to do those, okay? So that's just a quick summary of how it'll do it. Now I'll go to the data governance and to the installation and configuration over there. Installation is very quick. I will do so you have options of, in the command line, you have options of either do an interactive mode or you can go into a GUI mode, which is very rarely used any of the Ping data platforms, because more often than not, we see that the Ping data platform installations are done maybe at the data centers at the level where very few people have got access to. And also, more often than not, they say, no, you guys will not be able to even touch it. You just tell us what to do or give us scripts so that those data center people can do that. So all our installations can be scripted, so you can just create scripts and give those. So I will just go over the interactive mode, but still from the command line. I already have got the software downloaded here, so I'm not going to go there, and I put it there in a specific directory here. So what you just do is you do setup. Now, this is a warning. You see if the file descriptors are not set. You can go ahead and set those, but it will not block you from doing anything. It will just go ahead. First thing, it will ask you to accept the license. You just do yes, most of the cases we want to. Now, this is the question. It starts with the first thing. Oh, how can I make it a little bit bigger? Sorry? No, but that will not not increase the font. Okay. Do you know how to just font? Control Command Plus? Okay. Okay, that's much better. Okay. And you can understand I'm new to Mac. The first question it asks is, do you want to add this to an existing set of servers? Because you can have an existing group of servers already, you may be adding it to the topology. So in this case, it will be no for us. The next thing is it asks for a fully qualified domain name on an IP address. I have updated my host file, so I just using a name over here, but that's just the host file. I have configuration that it can go to localhost. Otherwise, it will not take localhost. It will not allow me to use localhost. Okay, so this is how I'm actually doing localhost. The next thing is it will just give you warning you because this is not a fully qualified domain name and stuff. Don't worry. Oh, what happened? Sorry, I said no. Okay. Next is the admin user account that you want to specify. I'm just making my life a little bit different from here. And you need a password for that. Okay. Now these are the port numbers it will ask you for, that where you want the admin console to run, where the LDAP connections will be making, where the HTTPS connections will be happening. So this is the HTTPS. Now as you see that it had already selected a port for me, suggesting me something, because it looks into all the available ports and tries to be a little bit intelligent over there. So it's suggesting me the 8443 is available HTTP port, HTTPS port, sorry. So I'm accepting that. Same way now for LDAP, it is doing the same thing. I'll keep it, I'll not use the default one because I'll keep it the same way, the 8 prefix. So I'll do the 8389. And I'll do SSL because I need LDAP-S, so I'll do that. And now it kind of giving you 866 over there. Start TLS, it's optional, but let me say yes. We'll use a self-signed certificate. This is a memory model, but obviously in production you will be going most of the cases aggressive or semi-aggressive because that keeps your performance. But here, if I do that, my machine will stop. So I'm going into the minimal model, or you can do manual and give whatever you want. This location name is just to kind of give you a name of it. So when you are creating a topology, so you know all in the same location name will be part of the same topology. So let's use this. Okay, so this is the instance name. You can just select whatever it is. And when the configuration is done, I'll start it. So now I'll set up and let it go. It's very quick, don't worry. Yeah, in the meantime, the whole setup has got two parts of it. The first part is the setup is just basically setting the software and have everything ready for you, but bare bone. There is no configuration in any way done for that. Normally in real life production deployments, we stop after this because that's where we start each and every configuration point. What this will give you an option at the end is to run something called what we call CIBC, create initial broker config. If you run that, it does some initial configuration. So when you go into it, you will not just see an empty thing. You will see some stuff already configured. And depending upon how much you go into that, you may even have some sample policies, sample accounts, yes, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask a question while we're watching?
Yeah.
Your architecture for the ping sync, it's synchronizing with the consent directory, the source. If you have the requirement to implement changes in consent or revocation immediately, how does that work? If the consent revocation is going to be done in the source, how often can you set up the sync, and how can you replicate it so that it's enforced immediately?
Sync is real time, so you can set it for real time. You don't have to set it for offline mode. You can set it for a kind of offline mode, we call it, but normally sync is set up for real time. So if it's real time sync, it's mostly milliseconds that you see the data will be in. So that's number one. And yeah, so depending upon what is your latency that you can survive with, but as I said, it's always milliseconds the data comes in. Okay. But if you are doing bulk, what we call a resync, then you are doing, I cannot, because we had some cases where they said, no, we cannot have something continuously kind of polling and doing, because it will do continuous polling. So if you say, no, my database is so sensitive, so it cannot take that much load anymore if you have another thing polling me. Okay, in that case, you may have to set up something where, first and foremost, you still set it up in real-time mode, but you can change the time of polling or gap between every poll. Okay, so you still keep it in real time, but change the, say, poll every 12 hours or whatever is fine with you. Or you run it in resync mode, but the resync does it every time it loads all the data. Real-time sync just loads the updated thing, anything that is changed, even at the attribute level. It doesn't load the whole record. It just looks whatever is changed, it loads that. Okay, but resync always will load everything. But if you say, no, in my case, I will be doing that, you can also set it in that way. But in that case, all the data every time will be overwritten. And that's very rare case. But normally, that changing that time or polling time is the way to go. Okay. But obviously, in that case, you will not get that immediate effect of that change, that consent change. What's happening? It doesn't take that long normally. Yeah, it's normally just a minute or so. I don't know why it's not taking as much. The PingDirectory not there. So you see this particular script that it gives you an offer to run it at the end of the initial setup, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it now. Okay, this is where it is kind of telling you that what user account it will be using to connect to the user store. That means the backend repository that it wants to do. If that account is not there, in our case, it gets created in the directory if you're connecting to a directory, the Ping directory. So I say 1, and then we give any password for that, so I'll just keep it the same way. Okay. So normally we always go SSL. We don't suggest non-HTTP or LDAP in that case going into the backend. So by default it's 2. Okay, so now it's asking where the data stored is, the Ping directory is. So the Ping directory, obviously, it's kind of by default thought that it's the same name, but I have it at Altier : 1636. So it's asking that whether I can prepare the backend directory. The preparing is more of the creating that account, the service account, and all those things it can do for you. Once again, we say yes. So we choose a third one because if there are others in the kind of topology, it does it for all. So that's why the 3. Okay. Now it's asking the connection details, credentials, how to connect to the directory. So directory, when I created cn equals to dmanager, the user account. The password I had is, hopefully it's right. So it's failed to connect. 1636 I have. Yeah, looks right. Sorry? Yeah, it's not allowing me to go do anything now. Oh, did I use old store there? Oh, okay. Sorry. just kill it and start. Okay, now it's better. Thank you, Vamshi. Okay, I don't have any more servers. I just have one server, so I'll let it go. Here it gives you options, different options in that, do you want to configure with some test data, configure with the basic policies and all those things or not. I don't want to do that. I will create our own schema of user and all those things. So we don't want to choose the sample ones there. So I'll choose 3 over there just to create no schema or example data or stuff like that. Okay, and it's saying that OU people that one, but I don't have that. So I'll use a different base DN, and my base DN is OU equal to users. Once again, before I make mistakes, let me configure. Yeah, OU users, and then DC, what do we have? Till old. DC com, right? Okay. I'm all fat finger now. Y equals to users, this equals to flip till hold, this equals to com. Okay. The structural object class I created over there, once again, let me confirm that I am using the right one. This one, flip till. Okay. At this point in time, the option it gave you that all those things that we did, it can write all the scripts, basically all the scripts that you need ultimately to do the same thing over and over, it can write to a file, okay? So I chose that, so now all the scripts, all the commands that has been run behind the screen, scenes, is copied to a config file, and then you can use that in this environment or recreate the environment or adjust the variable values and use it to create other environments. Okay. I'll do this as well. Say go admin. Okay, so at this point in time, I'm done with the installation. So once I'm done with the installation, now I can go and start configuring things. So I have this thing running at the local host. Port we chose is 8443, and the admin console runs at console. Okay, obviously this is self-signed start. Okay. Sorry? No. Okay, so this is the console once again. This is just for people like me, the faint-hearted people, but most of the people go into the command line and do the same thing. Everything that you can do from the command line can also be done from this as well. Each and everything is available as an API, so as a RESTful API. So if you want to write your own console kind of application, you can do that. Okay, so all the options are available to you. So the first thing what we do is we go ahead and look at that the servers that we created at the end of the day. When we configured, I said that you connect to this store, so it already is connecting to the store. It verified that it can connect and everything. But if you have to change anything, you can come over here and change the details once again to connect to that. So that's the user store that I have. Then the next thing is we call store adapters. Once again, it already created a store adapter, the user store adapter, but what we are seeing that the store adapter is saying that it knows which object classes needs to go to, what is the best, and all those data that you gave at the time of configuration, it created a store adapter. A store adapter is nothing but the component that connects to the physical data. Governance server doesn't hold any physical data. Okay, it always pulls the data in from the backend store. So these two things, but as if you need to update, you can create other store adapters with other details if you want to use it. The last thing a little bit to know about is a load balancing algorithm that is used. In this case, we just have one server at the, behind the scene, but if you, most of the cases have multiple backend servers in your topology, so you say that which load balancing algorithm you want to use and in which order the backend servers will be looked and all those things. So in this case, all these things are done as part of that initial broker configuration. What we'll do is we'll start with a scheme resource schema. So the actual physical schema of the object may not be the one that you are exposing. You may want to create your logical schema that will be exposed to through the scheme. So this is the schema that you are creating over here. So I call my user schema over here, but this is going to be kind of an URN model, okay? So just give it a URN to that. And then you create your attributes over here. For each attribute, all of you who are familiar with scheme and the corresponding schema, it's basically you are doing the same thing over here. So we start with, say, I have something called login name I want, which will be my the username or the login ID. that I want that string. I want it to be required attribute in my model, and by default it will be returned and all those different things you can set up for this one. Next one, it gives you that if it is, you can create sub-attributes if it's a complex type object. So in this case, there's no sub-attributes, so I just say I'm done with this one. So this way we have to, create the password. The password you have to be careful about. So you cannot say that it is required, because if you say that it's required, then it will be means any request and all those things will try to pull it, or it will, every time you try to update, and so it will try to ask for that. You don't need that. Obviously, this is not a read-write. This is, you cannot read the password, so this is a write-only data, okay? And obviously, you don't want to return that with any request. Other than that, it's like any other, so obviously there's no thing over there. We'll create a couple of other things, say first name, string, I'll make it required, everything remains the same. In the back end, the schema have made us, so when I created that, I made the CN as a required attribute. So I just keep it that same way over here. And the most interesting two things that we are looking into, one is the email address. Okay, we'll make it required as well. And the other one is the consent value. Now, all these names that I'm giving doesn't have to be anything matching with your underlying directory. So this is your logical schema that you are creating. And we have this as integer. Type has to match because otherwise it will be a problem. Unless you have an option to update the store adapter, extend the store adapter to your choice. We have a plugin point and SDK for that. But by default, otherwise it will try to match that type when you map it. We make it required as well, and everything else the same. So if it was a string, I could have said that there's a canonical value set I can give, but this is not a string and an integer, so I'm not doing that. But when we created the backend store over there, we had restricted the values to -1 through 1, -1, 0, and 1. So it will not allow, even if you try to write a different value, you'll get an error over there. Okay. So this is done. So this is the schema we have defined. We have to now go ahead and create resources. The difference between the schema and resource, once again, is schema is the definition of the object. You can create multiple resources out of a schema, okay? Or you can combine multiple schemas to create one resource. You don't have to represent all the attributes of a schema in a resource. You can take part of it and do it. So now I define a resource, so a new schema. So over here it gives you two options. One is saying that, is it a mapping? So in that case I'm saying that the names that I have in my local schema may not be same as the underlying schema. So I'm just really doing a mapping, so I have to provide the mapping. The other option, it gives a pass-through. That's for the easy thing. If you say, no, it's exactly the same, all the names, everything the same way, then you can just keep it as a pass-through, and you don't have to provide any mapping definitions over there. So we'll keep it mapping. And then, so this is our user schema. When you define, sorry, not schema, user resource. So when you define the resource, you say what is your scheme endpoint. So that will be your scheme and then / whatever it comes. So going by the scheme kind of standard, we give it a similar name, but with a plural over there. Which store adapter it will be using to get the data? We have only one store adapter, so that it will use to connect to the backend store and do things. What is your ID attribute? Once again, entry UID by default is role entry UID. Entry UID is nothing but in our the Ping directory there is internal UID generated for every record. That's an internal value. So you can use that as your kind of ID attribute or scheme ID attribute. But this is when you do that, you have to remember that you cannot, this is actually going to be mapped to as your RDN and stuff like that. So you may not really want to do that, okay? Oh my God, okay. Am I so slow? Yeah, that's what problem is. I tried to make it so squeezed, still it's taking time. The entry, so over here, we will use, there is login ID. Look at that. Yeah, it's login ID. Only thing is it has to be a string type and it has to be unique. So that's my login ID over there. Everything else remains the same. And over here, I just leave it whatever it is. But I have to say which schema I'm using. So that's done. So just go here. There's no secondary store adapter, it's done. And the store adapter mappings. So we have login name here, which will map to login ID backend. Want to make it searchable as well. Password goes to user password in the iNetwork person, because behind the scene it's using our iNetwork person extended. Okay, first name, in iNetwork person, this is the given name, right? Now, if I by mistake give a different name or different things which doesn't really exist, if I said given names, and when the moment I say save, it will do it. But, oh, sorry, what did I do? No, we cannot do that. Creating some attributes. Okay. Done. Sorry. Sorry? Did I? Okay, I'll change that. And this is no. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll kind of skip those. Now looks like I should have set those up before instead of doing it here. So what we do is once we have that, ultimately your request, everything goes through a policy. So at the core of this is the policies. So we go and configure the XACML policies over here in this, and in the policy we say what we want to do. So every time a request comes in, depending upon what the request is, what type of request is, governance server goes through the policy, the set of policies that's in the system, and looks into which policies are applicable to this particular request. Okay, so what we'll be doing at the end of the day is here we'll create a new policy, and we'll make that part of a policy set, which is a scheme resource policy set. Okay, so once we do that, so over here currently there are two different policies that runs on every scheme request. So we'll add the new policy over there, and the new policy that we are creating, we are going to we're going to tell that, once again, this is a XAML policy. So I have a policy that I created over here. So what is saying that when you are trying to send a request, you have to have your, it's a resource type policy. It is also saying that it's applicable to only when you are trying to retrieve data. So at the time of creation, this policy should not be applicable. Okay, and then this is applicable to a particular application. So you can give a list of applications that are WAUth clients that you configure, which will be, this policy will be applicable. So we'll be configuring a WAUth client there, which this policy will be applicable to. Okay, and then at the end of the day, you can add other conditions over there. So I had that staggered over there, gradually adding those things one by one. But basically, first thing we'll see is your consent value, okay, and then we'll add to that consent value is you're looking into an email address, last part of it, whether it's a CA-COM, and then how do you interpret that -1 thing, okay. So if anybody wants, I can send those policies over. I have all those built already over here. But I'm sorry, I didn't think it will take that much time over here. Okay, good. Any questions? No, it's not. So governance is independent of directory, actually. So you can have any data stored behind it, as long as you are, in this case, the store adapter we used is already developed for LDAP, but you can have store adapters developed for other type of repositories as well. So governance really does not expect that there is a Ping directory behind the scenes. Okay, it can protect data of any